past Blake and Grant, his eyes settling on the younger officer sitting stiff in the witness stand. "Officer Harris, step forward." Harris flinched as if his very name had struck him. He rose slowly, every movement heavy with dread, and made his way to the front. His hands trembled as he placed them on the Bible, swearing the oath. His voice cracked when he said, "I do." Marcus studied him, voice gentler now. "Officer Harris, you were present during the arrest, were you not?" "Yes, Your Honor," Harris whispered. "Then you saw everything," Marcus said. "I ask only this, tell this court the truth." The room seemed to close in around Harris. His chest rose and fell, too quickly, his throat tight. His eyes darted to Blake, then to Grant, two men whose shadows had loomed over him since his first day in uniform. In his mind, Harris saw another face, his father's. A strong black man beaten to the ground years ago, groaning under the weight of the same blue uniforms Harris now wore. He had buried that memory deep, but in this moment it surged back, burning hotter than fear. Blake leaned slightly towards him, whispering like a serpent, "Remember your badge, don't you dare." Harris's lips trembled. He thought of his paycheck, his mortgage, his little sister who needed school supplies. He thought of the silence he had kept for so long, the lies he had let slide to protect himself. But then his father's voice echoed in his head, "Rough but proud, son. You serve the law, not the men who twist it." Something shifted in Harris's eyes. The trembling stopped. He straightened his back, his voice breaking the silence with a clarity that stunned even himself. "They arrested him for nothing." Harris said loud enough for the gallery to hear. A gasp tore through the room. They laughed while doing it. He continued, stronger now. "And when I hesitated, they pressured me to lie. Officer Blake handed me the report and told me to sign it. To say Judge Ellison resisted, that he raised his hand against us. None of it was true." The gallery erupted, gasps, shouts, the raw sound of people realizing justice had cracked through the walls. Blake shot to his feet, his face crimson, spit flying as he roared, "You traitor! You worthless coward!" Harris turned, his voice steady, no longer afraid. "I serve the law, not you." It hit the room like thunder. For a moment, no one breathed. Then slowly applause began. Not the wild clapping of celebration, but the heavy, tear-soaked claps of people who had been waiting years, decades, to hear such words spoken aloud in a court of law. A man in the back whispered through choked sobs, Finally, someone told the truth." Marcus's face remained steady, but his eyes gleamed with something deeper, pride and the faintest trace of pain. He struck the gavel once, the sound echoing like a heartbeat. "This court recognizes the testimony," he said firmly, "and it will not be buried." Blake was seething, restrained by deputies, as he lunged forward, still shouting, "He's lying. They're all lying." But the words rang hollow. The truth had already broken loose, and there was no dragging it back. In that moment, the gallery wasn't just watching a trial, they were watching a reckoning. For the first time in years, hope flickered in weary eyes, the belief that justice wasn't a dream, but something alive, breathing here in this very room. And as Harris stood taller than he ever had before, one thing was clear: the silence that once protected the guilty had finally been shattered. The air in that courtroom had grown heavy, so heavy you could almost taste it. What started as a trial had become something else entirely, a reckoning. Blake's face burned, red veins bulging at his neck. He could no longer hold back the rage twisting inside him. Slamming his fists on the table, he pointed straight at the bench and roared, "You set us up! This whole damn thing was a trap!" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even seasoned reporters froze, pens hovering midair. But Marcus didn't flinch. He sat high in his chair, robed in black, his expression as steady as stone. His voice low but unyielding, sliced through Blake's fury like a blade through paper. "No," Marcus said. "You set yourselves up. All I did was stay silent." The words hung in the air, sharp and merciless. They cut deeper than any outburst could. And for the first time, Blake's bluster faltered. The crowd felt it too. You could see it in their faces, the dawning realization that arrogance had finally met something stronger. Truth. Grant, desperate, leaned forward. "Your Honor, he's twisting this. We only acted because we believed." Marcus's gaze shifted to him, calm but piercing. "Believed what, Officer Grant? That a man's skin was evidence, that silence meant guilt? No. You didn't act on belief. You acted on prejudice. And prejudice has no place in this court." Grant's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping on dry land. The more he tried to speak, the more the room could see through him. His words stumbled, tangled, exposing every falsehood. "You don't understand," he stammered. "We thought we were doing the right thing." Marcus's voice thundered now, not in volume but in force. "The right thing does not laugh while binding an innocent man. The right thing does not demand lies. You confused your power with justice, and today the difference stands in front of you." The room went utterly silent. It was the kind of silence that didn't just hush mouths but stilled hearts. Blake slammed his hand again louder, desperate to claw back control. "This is madness. He's just using his seat to humiliate us." But his words rang hollow. The audience, those townsfolk, the reporters even, Earl, who had been dragged in for his own hearing, sat transfixed. They were no longer seeing a contest of authority. They were watching arrogance crumble under the weight of its own lies. Whispers began to spread. "He's right," someone murmured. "They always did this, and now it's out in the open." Another voice added, "It wasn't a setup. It was their own mouths that gave them away." The murmurs grew threading through the crowd like wildfire. Eyes that once looked at Blake and Grant with respect now glared with contempt. Marcus waited, letting the weight of truth do its work. Then he leaned forward, his voice calm, but each word heavy as stone. "You came into this court certain you would win," he said, his tone unwavering. "Certain that uniforms and arrogance would shield you. But arrogance blinds, and today that blindness has ended." Blake's jaw clenched so hard it looked ready to crack. He tried to rise again to protest, but the deputies pressed him back down. For the first time, the once feared officer looked small, not because he had lost his temper, but because the mask of invincibility had been torn away. Grant sat beside him, pale sweat tracing his temple. He muttered something under his breath, maybe an excuse, maybe a prayer, but it carried no weight anymore. In that moment, it wasn't just Marcus Ellison presiding as judge. It was justice itself staring arrogance in the face and refusing to blink. And the crowd, they weren't just spectators anymore. They were witnesses to something rare, something raw, the collapse of power built on lies. No one clapped this time. No one cheered. The silence spoke louder. It was the silence of realization, the silence of respect, the silence of arrogance falling piece by piece right there in the middle of the courtroom floor. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes steady on Blake and Grant. His voice carried no anger, only a calm weight that silenced the restless murmurs. "I could end your careers today," he said, every word deliberate. "But justice is not revenge." The words hung in the air, sharp yet strangely gentle. The crowd, expecting thunder and punishment, froze. Reporters lifted their pens again, sensing this was more than a trial, it was a turning point. Marcus let the silence stretch, then continued. "Revenge only feeds the fire. Justice puts it out. Yesterday you believed you could bend the law to your will. Today you face what the law truly is: not a weapon for payback, but a shield for the people." From the back row, Earl pressed a trembling hand to his mouth. For years he had carried the weight of hopelessness, telling himself courts were for the powerful, never for men like him. Yet now, as tears welled, he whispered almost to himself, "So this is what justice looks like." Near him, others nodded, some blinking away their own tears. The mood in the room shifted, not toward vengeance, but toward something deeper. Blake tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "He's just trying to humiliate us." Marcus lifted a hand, stopping him cold. "No, I'm reminding you, this system you mocked is not built to satisfy grudges. It exists to protect every person who steps into this courtroom, even the ones you thought you could trample." The hush that followed was heavy, but it was not empty. It carried meaning, carried relief. People leaned forward, hearts caught between sorrow and hope. Officer Harris, still seated in the witness chair, could not take his eyes off Marcus. In that moment, he understood why his conscience had pushed him to speak up. Truth mattered here. He whispered almost in awe, This is justice." Marcus looked his way, acknowledging him with a slight nod, then turned back to the officers. "Blake, Grant, you believed power was yours to wield. But power without principle is nothing but cruelty, and cruelty has no place in this room." The tension broke when a woman in the gallery exhaled loudly as if releasing years of pain. Another man muttered, "Finally." The shift was undeniable. What began as anger and demand for payback was slowly being reshaped into trust. trust in something greater than rage. Marcus's voice softened, but the steel remained beneath it. I will not reduce myself to vengeance. I will not dishonor the law by making it serve bitterness. Justice must stand higher than that, or it is no justice at all. For a moment, even Blake and Grant were silent. Their arrogance, their mockery, every bit of it wilted under the weight of Marcus's calm. They had expected retaliation. Instead, they faced a standard they could never reach. Earl, still fighting back tears, whispered again, "Hope, it's still alive." And for the first time in years, he believed it. Reporters scribbled furiously. They weren't just recording a verdict, they were capturing a rare moment when justice rose above human anger. Marcus's gaze swept the room. Some of you came here today expecting a fight. You wanted to see me strike back, to humiliate those who wronged me. But that is not why this court exists. This court does not answer to vengeance, it answers only to justice. The words settled over the crowd like a steady hand on a trembling shoulder. And though no gavel struck, everyone knew something had been decided. I'll never forget how the headlines lit up that week. Every paper, every channel, every phone screen carried the same story: a judge wrongfully arrested by racist cops. The words felt heavy, almost unbelievable, and yet the proof was undeniable. The video, the one recorded back at the very beginning when Marcus was shoved against the hood of a cruiser, had leaked. It wasn't polished, wasn't edited, just shaky footage from a bystander's phone. But it showed everything: the handcuffs, the harsh voices, the refusal to listen. It spread faster than anyone could contain, and by the time networks played it on loop, the whole city had already seen it. People couldn't look away. Within days, sidewalks filled. People marched not with rage that burned everything in sight, but with a steady, quiet fire. Handmade signs rose above the crowd: justice for all, end bias policing, dignity has no color. Some carried candles instead of placards, the flames flickering in the wind like small declarations of hope. I remember an elderly black woman pushing her way through the crowd to where Marcus stood. She took his hand in both of hers, her eyes wet with tears. "You gave us hope," she whispered, voice trembling, but certain. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't even loud enough for the microphones, but I heard it, and so did Marcus. Right after a white man stepped forward, middle-aged hands stuffed nervously in his jacket pockets. He didn't chant, didn't wave a sign. He just nodded slowly and said almost to himself, "We were wrong." The words hung in the air. For a moment, it felt like the whole crowd breathed differently. That one admission was more powerful than any slogan painted on cardboard. Back at the precinct, though, things weren't so simple. Officer Harris felt the air shift the moment he walked in. Lockers slammed harder than usual, conversations dropped to a hush. A voice he couldn't place muttered, "Snitch." No one said his name, but everyone did. His sergeant called him into a cramped office, closed the door, and spoke in a careful, measured tone about pending reviews and department protocol. No reprimand, no protection either. Just cold air and colder eyes. Later, Harris sat alone in his car. The radio argued about the video, about him, about whether loyalty to truth should come before loyalty to the badge. He typed a message to his sister, "I'm okay," then deleted, "I'm scared," before sending it. His forehead rested against the steering wheel as he breathed in the silence. Fear sat in the passenger seat, relief in the back. Conscience, though, took the wheel. "I did the right thing," he whispered, and for once the words didn't shake. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, the movement kept building. That evening, a pastor stood on the courthouse steps reading from Amos, "Let justice roll down like waters." His voice echoed against the stone walls, strong, but worn with years of prayer. A local shop owner, white, nervous, yet sincere, took the microphone after him. "Training isn't enough if fear wears the badge," he said. "We have to change the culture." The crowd didn't roar. Instead, they clapped soft, steady, like rain on tin roofs. When the police chief finally announced an internal investigation, no one cheered wildly. They just listened, wary but willing. It wasn't victory, it was the first honest step. And through it all, Marcus stayed silent. Reporters tried to push microphones into his hands. Cameras flashed, questions flew. But he said nothing, not out of pride, not out of anger. His silence had become something else, an anchor in the storm. People leaned on it, read their own courage into it. His quiet became the crowd's compass. As the sun dipped behind the courthouse, Marcus slipped through a side door to avoid the swarm of cameras waiting at the front. On the steps, a boy on a bicycle skidded to a stop. His hair stuck up in the wind, his sneakers barely holding onto the pedals. He raised a small hand, almost like a salute. Marcus paused, touched the folded robe draped over his arm, and nodded back. He didn't need to say a word. That single gesture carried everything. No victory lap, no grand statement. Just a steady walk down the courthouse steps, each footfall quieter than the chant still echoing blocks away. It was as if to say, tomorrow the law will speak again, and it won't need to raise its voice. The aftershocks of that courtroom didn't fade. They spread into homes, into schools, into the hearts of people who'd once looked the other way. And all because one man's silence had spoken louder than anything else could. I can still see him as if it happened yesterday. Marcus stepped out of the courthouse, not with the swagger of a man who had just silenced his enemies, but with the calm dignity of someone who had already won long before the gavel ever fell. His pace was steady, unhurried, like each step carried its own quiet meaning. No celebration, no smile of triumph, just a steady, even walk, head lifted shoulders, relaxed eyes fixed somewhere beyond the crowd. There was no robe on him now. He had draped it over his arm, folded neat and plain, as though it was nothing more than a piece of cloth. Stripped of that garment, Marcus looked like any other man stepping into the cool evening air. He didn't push through the crowd, didn't wave at the cameras. He simply blended into the stream of people, spilling onto the sidewalk. Yet somehow every person there felt the shift. He wasn't just another citizen. He had become something larger, a symbol. And that was the strange part. He hadn't shouted a single word in his defense. He hadn't raised his voice against the men who humiliated him, hadn't argued when others tried to cut him down. All he had done was stand, endure, and let the truth rise on its own. But that silence, it shook walls louder than any outburst could have. I remember the sound that rose behind him. Not chants, not chaos. It was applause measured deliberate, as if each clap was a vote, a promise, a confession. The people didn't cheer like a crowd at a game. They stood and clapped as if they were honoring something sacred. And then came the words. Marcus paused on the steps, glanced at the microphones that swayed toward him, and spoke just once. His voice was low, but it carried. Justice is not in the robe I wear, he said, but in the choices we make when no one is watching. The crowd stilled. For a moment, you could hear the wind weaving through the flags above the courthouse. Then the clapping returned louder, steadier, until it sounded less like noise and more like a heartbeat running through the square. Earl was there too, standing a few steps back. The man who had once mocked Marcus, who had laughed with the other officers as they shoved him into cuffs, he stood frozen now. His jaw clenched, but his eyes betrayed him. The tears slid down anyway. He didn't wipe them. He just let them fall as if some part of him finally broke open. Further off, Harris lingered near the edge of the steps. He didn't try to approach Marcus, didn't need to. His fists tightened at his sides, knuckles pale against his skin, not in anger but in resolve. That one gesture was enough. You could tell he had chosen his side and there was no going back. I looked around at the people gathered there, mothers with children perched on their hips, young men gripping homemade signs, old neighbors leaning on canes. And I realized this wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It wasn't even about the trial or the cops or the headlines. It was about all of them, about us, about what we let ourselves tolerate and what we finally decided we wouldn't. Marcus stepped down from the last stair and into the crowd. Cameras craned to follow him, but he moved with such ease that he seemed to dive into the sea of people. For a heartbeat, I lost sight of him completely. And that was the beauty of it. He wasn't above the crowd, he was in it, just a man among men. Yet every pair of eyes followed him. Every face carried that silent recognition. This is what strength looks like when it refuses to boast. I swear I can still hear the echo of those claps in my ears. They weren't just for him. They were for the truth, for the courage it took to stand still when everything pushed him down, for the reminder that justice isn't a courtroom word, it's a choice repeated every day in the quiet when no one is watching. And when I think back on that day, I don't remember the roar of the news vans or the flash of the cameras. I don't remember the shouting debates or the scrambling reporters. I remember Earl's tears. I remember Harris's fist tightening. I remember strangers standing, taller neighbors holding hands, and children watching with wide eyes. That's how I knew something had shifted. Not overnight, not enough to erase the ugliness of prejudice or the cracks in the system, but enough to leave a mark. Enough to remind us that one man's calm can ripple louder than a mob's rage. As the sun sank behind the courthouse, the sky painted gold and gray, the crowd slowly dispersed. Yet nobody left empty. They carried something with them like a weight, but a good kind, the kind that keeps you standing a little straighter. And me, I walked home that night with a lump in my throat and a fire in my chest. I had seen justice not as a robe, not as a title, not as a verdict, but as a choice. A choice made in silence and carried out with every step. That's how it ended. Not with shouting, not with violence, but with silence, with tears, with fists clenched in resolve, with hands clapping in unity. And that ending, if you ask me, wasn't really an ending at all. It was the start of something bigger, something we're still writing today. And that's the heart of this story. It reminds us that true justice isn't about titles or uniforms. It's about the choices we make, the courage we carry, and the dignity we refuse to let go of. These moments live on because they speak to something deeper in all of us. If this story moved you, please take a moment to hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Max Stories for more powerful tales that shed light on justice, courage, and humanity. Your support means the world to us. Every share and every new subscriber gives our team the strength to keep creating meaningful stories for you. Together, we're building more than just a channel. We're building a community that believes in truth and dignity. Remember, this is Mr. Max Stories, where every story is more than just words. It's a voice for justice. Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellison was slammed against a wall, handcuffed and mocked by officers Blake believes in truth and dignity. Remember, yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellison was slammed against a wall, handcuffs or uniforms. It's about the choices we make. Yesterday, a black man named Marcus and the dignity we was slammed against a wall, handcuffs or uniforms. These moments live on. It's about because the choices we make. Yesterday, a black man named Marcus and the dignity we was slammed against a wall, handcuffs. These moments live on. It's about because the choices we make. Yesterday, a black man named Marcus and the dignity we was slammed against a wall, handcuffs. These moments live on. It's about because the choices we make. Yesterday, a black man named Marcus and the dignity we was slammed against a wall, handcuffs. These moments live on. It's about because the choices we make. Yesterday, your command days, and together we're going to slam like everything will share, and building on yesterday, your command days, remember this, together we're going to slam like everything will share, and building on yesterday, your command days, remember this, together we're going to slam like everything will share, and building on yesterday, your command days, remember this, together we're going to slam like everything will share, and building on yesterday, your command days, remember this, together we're slam like everything out here. Yesterday, your command day. Remember that together we're going to slam like everything out here. Yesterday, your command day. Remember that together we're going to slam like everything out here. Yesterday, your command day. Remember that together we're going to slam like everything out here. Yesterday, your command day. Remember that together we're going to slam like everything out here. Yesterday, your command day. Remember that together we're going to slam like everything out here. Yesterday, your command day. Remember that together we're going to slam like everything out here. Yesterday, your command day. Remember that together we're going to slam like everything out here. Yesterday, your command day. Remember that together we're going to slam like everything out here. Yesterday, your command day. Remember that together we're going to slam like everything out here. Yesterday, your command day. Remember that together we're going to slam like everything out here. Yesterday, your command day. Remember that together we're going to slam like everything out here. Yesterday, your command day. Remember that together we're going to slam like everything out here. Yesterday, your command day. Remember that together we're going to slam like everything out here. Yesterday, your command day. Remember that together we're going to slam like everything out here. Yesterday, your command day. Remember that together we're going to slam like everything out here. Yesterday, your command day. Remember that together we're going to slam like everything. Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellison was slammed against a wall, handcuffed and mocked by every together we're going to slam like yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellison was slammed against a wall, handcuffed and mocked by every together we're going to slam like yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellison was slammed against a wall, handcuffed and mocked by every together we're going to slam like yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellison was slammed against a wall, handcuffed and mocked by every Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall in Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellis was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August was slammed against the wall. A black man named August Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellison was slammed against a wall, handcuffed and mocked by officers Blake and Grant. Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellison was slammed against a wall, handcuffed and mocked by officers Blake and Grant. Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellison was slammed against a wall, handcuffed and mocked by officers Blake and Grant. Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellison was slammed against a wall, handcuffed and mocked by officers Blake and Grant. Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellison was slammed against a wall, handcuffed and mocked by officers Blake and Grant. Yesterday, a black man named Marcus Ellison was slammed against a wall, handcuffed and mocked by officers Blake and Grant. Yesterday, a black